So in the last video you saw that my Hooke Road bumper was all hooked up on the back of my Tacoma, but I still have some final finishing touches and assembly to do on the vehicle. First things first, you got to find some hardware for your license plate. That's easy enough to do, especially if you're like me and you have a bucket of hardware in your toolbox, in your garage ready to go. But if you need to go source your own hardware, 1/4 inch diameter, 3/4 inch long, and any type of nylon locking nut will work, and even better if you get a wide flange on the bolt head and the nut itself, but that's not required. So let's go ahead and talk about the other part of being street legal, which is going to be your license plate light. The Hooke Road bumper comes with this LED license plate light, and it only comes with one. You may remember that the Tacoma bumper came with two. Now on the end of this license plate light, it's going to have what I call a blade style connector. It's just kind of a flat connector, and that's not going to mate directly in with the vehicle side of the wire harness, which is a weatherproof seal. But if you go ahead and take one of these lights that you removed from the stock bumper, grab the back side of the socket, twist it like you're going to change the bulb. Now you can go ahead and gently grab the bulb and pull that out. That bulb plugged into a socket that will accept a blade style connector. So now you can go ahead and plug that in here, and then this end will plug into the vehicle side of your wire harness. So this is not going to be a weatherproof connector, so if you do want to go this route, I would recommend taking either some electronics grade silicone and kind of filling in around the connectors, or packing it full of dielectric grease. You don't want moisture in there, dirt and debris getting in there, causing either a short circuit or corrosion that can cause a blown fuse later on that can be difficult to diagnose. If you are comfortable cutting into the vehicle wire harness like I am, then I recommend just buying a couple weatherproof connectors that have a couple inches of wire on the end. That way you can go ahead and cut off the red and black from this one, and I'll go ahead and butt splice that together. And then I'll go ahead and cut it off of the vehicle end as well. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and just snip off the end of this, and we'll strip just, you know, 1/2 inch or so on the ends of the wire. It's very small wire, so just be careful not to cut all the way through it or pull on it. So I went ahead and twisted those wires together really carefully, and I actually folded it over so that way it'll be a little bit thicker and more to grab onto. And I'm just going to grab my wire strippers and crimping tool and crimp that on good and tight. Same thing on the ground side. Little bit of a tug test. That seems like that's not going anywhere. Now we're going to heat shrink this down. So this heat shrink is actually lined with adhesive on the inside, so it's actually going to create a nice weather tight seal, because as it shrinks up, it melts the adhesive and glues itself to the outer jacket of the wire. Then I also have some wire harness tape. This is different than regular electrical tape. This is kind of a fabric tape that's really good at creating a tough, abrasive, resistant layer on the outside. So I'm just going to start with these connectors, and I'm just going to tape up about 3 inches in the middle, so that way it's not going to stress the connectors themselves, and they'll kind of be taped and reinforced. So now that I have this spliced in and all taped up, I'm just going to take the mating end, and I'm going to go ahead and take it underneath the vehicle, cut the old connector off, and splice that in a similar way. And now I'm going to have a connector with a weatherproof seal for my license plate light. Go ahead and do as much of the crimping as you can outside of the truck. More room to work, a lot easier. So underneath the vehicle, on the passenger side of the spare tire, this is going to be the connector I'm going to cut off. It's got a blue and then a white and black wire. Not going to use that anymore. I did have to take a razor blade and cut some electrical tape to slide the conduit back. No going back now. Going out on a limb here, and I'm going to assume that the red is going to blue and the black will go to the black and white. I could look up a schematic, or I could live life on the edge. So I just did a soft crimp here just so I can go ahead and test it, then I'll do a full crimp, heat shrink, and tape. So now I just disconnect the license plate light, and I'm going to go pop it into the cutout, which by the way is the same geometry of several generations of Ford F-150 and other Ford pickup trucks. So if you ever need to replace this light for whatever reason, go to Amazon, and look for Ford F-150 LED license plate lights. Then just fish it up underneath, connect it, zip tie it, make sure you don't have any wires that hang down, and you're good to go. So after you remove the stock Toyota bumper, you lose a lot of wire harness retention points, and I just kind of have mine currently zip tied to a smaller branch that was up here, but you don't really want a large heavy wire harness hanging from a smaller wire harness. You don't want it tugging, bouncing around, and potentially like breaking a connector or pulling a wire out. So there's this flange of sheet metal right here. It's not decorative or anything, you're not going to see it, but I'm going to drill several like 1/4 inch holes all the way across the width of it, so that way I could just zip tie everything to a known secure point. So I did get 4 holes drilled in that sheet metal, so I got 4 big zip ties holding that main branch of the wire harness all the way across the vehicle. So the best way to seal up these connectors left behind from the blind spot monitoring system is to go ahead and pack it with dielectric grease. Then go to Harbor Freight and get yourself some large diameter heat shrink tubing. This is 1 inch diameter. You can go ahead and slide that on. So I'm going to leave a bit of overhang, so it's just the bottom half of that heat shrink that's grabbing onto the connector. I'm going to go ahead and shrink it around the connector body. Now that you got heat shrink stuck to the connector body with this overhang, I'm going to fold it like that and put another piece of heat shrink on top of it to hold it down. So now I'm just going to go ahead and shrink up that last small piece of heat shrink tubing, and that'll hold the excess folded over and make it a nice weatherproof seal. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same process on the extra license plate lighting, just using a smaller tube of heat shrink. So now I got both blind spot monitor connectors sealed up, and I got the extra license plate connector sealed up. Go ahead and just zip tie them up out the way, up on the frame or on another part of the wire harness, just so they're not dangling down. So let's talk about this bracket real quick. I did have to clean up the inside edges with a die grinder. You could use a Dremel with a grinding stone to get the connector to actually be able to sit into it, because it was definitely a little too tight, especially with the extra width of the powder coat. But this bracket's supposed to bolt up right here, but I ran into a little bit of an issue. So the wire harness breakout that was for my trailer hitch connector is too short. It actually doesn't fit where this connector was going to be sitting when you bolt up this bracket. It's also a little bit more difficult too, because my wires come out at like a 90-degree angle to the back of the connector, and I know some Tacomas have the wires that come straight out, and just due to the clocking feature in there, the orientation of how it would have to be to fit in that bracket, it would have to be like twisted all around, and it was not going to work. Now I did contact Hooke Road about this, and they checked it on their test vehicle, and it turns out that on their Toyota Tacoma they had a much longer branch of the wire harness here, and they had wires that came straight out the back, and so it fit cleanly on theirs. But if you have this type of wire harness connector, this bracket will not work. So if you do have this style of wire harness on your truck and it's not going to work with the original design of the bracket, let's go ahead and talk through a couple different ways that you can work around it. So the first thing that you can do is, if you don't actually tow and you don't need to hook up trailer lights, you can just pack it up with some dielectric grease, get some large diameter heat shrink, probably 2 inches what you'll need for this, and you can seal it up just like you did the other connectors, and then you can just zip tie it up to the rest of the wire harness branch out of there, and it'll be out of the way. You can cross that bridge in the future. You know, if you ever decide to buy a boat and need to hook up trailer lights, it's always there to be able to access it when you need it, and you can, you know, try and work out a better solution when it's actually necessary. But if you're not doing anything right now, you don't actually need the trailer lights. The other option is that this connector is a standard 7-pin trailer light connector, so you can buy extensions. So you can buy extensions, but a lot of times they're kind of expensive. I saw some that were in the $30 to $40 range, and a lot of them are like 2 or 3 feet long, which really you only need probably like 12 inches, 1 foot of extra wire length here. But that is an option, that you can get an extension that'll just plug into this connector, and then it'll be able to reach down here where the original bracket sits, and then you'll be able to just plug it into the back of the trailer lights. That's always an option. So along that same train of thought, there is a extension kind of called a T-splice. So it basically has a 7-pin connector, and it has, you know, several inches of wire that goes into another 7-pin connector, but then it also has a splice coming out that would have either a 4 or a 5-pin trailer light connector. And so that is something that you can use. A lot of people use that so they can wire in their reverse spotlights, because a lot of people don't want to actually take apart, you know, the factory wire harness and start splicing into tail lights and everything, and that quite possibly can get you just enough length that you need to kind of get this located down here. So I will mention one more thing along the lines with the extension harness. is that if you don't want the bracket hanging down low here where it might get hit by a rock off-road, there's plenty of different ways that you can kind of surface mount them in the bumper if you have kind of metal cutting and grinding tools. So with those different options out of the way, I'll go ahead and show you how I chose to modify the bracket. So this is the modification to the bracket that I ended up making. So these first two slots are originally in the bracket from Hooke Road. Those are the ones they originally designed. I went ahead and drilled another hole. This is about 5/8 inch diameter, and that's about 89-90 millimeters from the center of this front slot. So now I'm going to use this slot and that hole. I made one other modification, which is if you're looking at the bracket from this vantage point, I did trim off this edge of that little bent flange, and that so it can fit flush up against the tube from the hitch. So underneath the vehicle, this is where it was originally designed to sit, right here where it's kind of recessed behind that hitch tube. If you look up and further back, you can see these two silver bolt heads. And so now I'm actually going to flip the bracket around, and I'm going to bolt it onto these two bolts. There is a little formed piece in the frame rail there, so that does kind of bend and deform the bracket a little bit, but you're able to get those bolts in. Here's the back side. Make sure that you're looking out for like the edges, because it is kind of cramped quarters up in here. But I was able to pack the back of that connector with dielectric grease. You can kind of grab the end of it here and flex it into place. You can see where I trimmed that lip off so it sits flush up on the hitch tube, and that's going to be very protected. So no rocks or off-road hazards are going to be able to pull on that wiring or knock that bracket and bend it out. It is going to be less convenient. So if you do tow a lot, you're going to have to kind of come up in this cavity with your trailer lighting and kind of route your trailer lighting down and through that cavity there. But for me, I like knowing that it's there in the event that I need it and having it be out of the way. I call this the high clearance stealth install. So let's go ahead and talk about the last step of this Hooke Road bumper install, which is going to be these rear facing spotlights. But really, this is not specific to this bumper. There's a ton of different ways that you can wire in rear-facing spotlights. The first question you got to answer yourself is, how do you want them to turn on? A lot of people wire them into your reverse light circuit, so that way whenever you go into reverse, they will light up. That'll help out if you have the backup camera. So that way the backup camera will be very bright and you'll be able to see, especially if you're on a dark trail. The other option is that you can wire it into a dedicated switch. And so you can have a switch in the dash and you can just turn them on and off as you please. Me personally, I think it makes sense to have them tied into the reverse lighting circuit. The next question you'll have to ask yourself is, do you want to control it through a relay, or do you want to just tap wire directly from the reverse lights? And I'm not going to go into the details of all of those different options, but at the end of the day, a relay is used to isolate the power consumption of the accessory from what you're using to trigger it. So you can have it triggered by the reverse lights, but then have the actual power that runs the light coming from the battery. And you would do that if these are very high power. That being said, these are low enough power that there should be enough room on a circuit based on the fuse size to power these along with your stock reverse lights. So one potential source for powering these lights, if you want to power them by the reverse light circuit, is going to be your trailer light wiring. If you look at this, I've said it before, it's a 7-pin wire harness connector for trailer lights. The center pin or the center wire in this bundle is going to be the reverse light circuit. So you can cut some tape back, you can peel the conduit back, and you can splice into the actual wire. As I also mentioned, for the relocation of this wire harness connector, that's why a lot of people like to use that T-splice connector, so that way you don't have to cut into the stock vehicle wire harness. So if you just want to get power from the tail light circuit, you got a red and a white wire. I will show that there is a good pass through where all the rest of the wiring goes down underneath the bumper, so you could easily splice into these wires and just route wires down below. Similar to what I did on my license plate lights, I do have weatherproof connectors, so I do plan on putting one of these down on the reverse lamp side underneath the bumper and making it quickly detachable, so if I do need to take the bumper down or remove it for whatever reason, I can just unplug it. It'll be a weatherproof seal and I don't have to worry about like recutting wires to get the bumper off or anything like that. So I went ahead and crimped on my waterproof connector with a heat shrink butt connector. So red to red, black to black, and I'm going to heat shrink it up. So a common way to splice into power, if you don't want to actually cut the harness, is going to be a T-tap. Sometimes these connectors are called splice connectors, or they're also called positaps. But these are different ways that you can splice into the side of a wire. In this case, you have this kind of clamshell looking connector, and it has a little metal piece on the inside, and you clamp it down on the wire. And then you use a spade style connector to plug into the side of it. That's a quick and easy way to do it. It's not necessarily going to be weatherproof. These theoretically can be prone to failure, although I've never really had them fail before, as long as you really make sure you get them crimped down good. And there is a little latching mechanism that you got to make sure you crimp it down all the way. These are also removable, and you can also use some liquid electrical tape to seal it up if you want to go that route. The other route that you can go is going to be to go ahead and cut through this red and the white wire, and then you can use just a butt connector, and you'll crimp one end, say, onto the light bulb socket. And then what you'll do is you'll take the other end of the wire that's on this weatherproof connector, and you'll merge that into the red wire on the other side. So basically on one side of the butt connector, you'll have one wire, and then on the other side, you're gonna have two wires. So that way you can kind of splice in that way. You can heat shrink it all the way down, tape it up real good. It should be a durable and long-lasting connection. So I went the easy route. I just did some T-taps here, and the pigtails on my weatherproof connectors were actually long enough. I didn't have to run any extra wire in and of itself. So I just connected the red to the red here. The black goes to the white and black. And you can see the spade style connector. I did heat shrink it. And I got just enough length on the bottom side of the connector that I'll be able to plug it in right behind the taillight housing. And here where it's not exactly weatherproof, I'll take some liquid electrical tape and just kind of paint it over the cracks and crevices. Although you're protected by sheet metal here, really on all sides, so I don't think there's going to be like water splashing up. A little liquid electrical tape, a little bit of tape on the wires here. You don't want it riding on any sharp edges. Wrap it in a little conduit, clean it up. So I've got both tail lights all buttoned up with all of the wiring taped together, coated in the liquid electrical tape to help weatherproof the T-splice connectors. And I got it all taped up so it's not going to scrape on any metal edges, and it routes down to the spotlights and the bumper. Now whenever I shift the car into reverse, not only will the reverse lights and the tail lights turn on, but the spotlights will turn on as well. And then likewise the inverse will happen. Once I leave reverse, go back to park or drive, then they'll turn off on their own, all powered from the same circuit, because they are low enough power that you don't need to run a dedicated relay or run them direct to the battery on a switch. So let's take a look. So there you have it. The only problem I got now is that the reverse lights and the tail lights are kind of more of a yellow hue as opposed to this nice, bright, clean white color of the LED spotlights. Maybe some LED light bulbs for my tail lights are gonna have to be the next mod, but we'll have to wait and see. So thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content of these videos, and comment below if you have questions or suggestions for future videos.